Don't waste your time on him. He's nothing but a dirty, drunken bum.
Do I look like a dirty, drunken bum?
Off a winding hillside road in Malibu, far from the glitz of Hollywood and the clinking of champagne glasses at glamorous parties, there stands a weathered gray cabin, its wooden frame nearly swallowed by the rocky slope. The warped door no longer locks. Window panes, long shattered, let the sea breeze drift in with the afternoon light. The air carries the scent of rotting wood and damp leaves collected under the porch, a chill that speaks not of death, but of quiet persistence. Some say, at times, you can still hear the floorboards creak, as if someone were walking through their own memories. That house once belonged to a man who stepped away from the spotlight at its brightest. An actor who could have been wealthy, could have remained a household name, but instead chose silence, shadow, and the lonely passing of seasons in a home few ever visited. His name was Pernell Roberts, the man who brought Adam Cartwright to life in the legendary Western series Bonanza. He was the man who walked away from Hollywood when everyone else was pushing to get in. And from that moment on, he vanished. No headlines. No farewell speech. No curtain call beneath a shining light. Only questions remained. How did he live after walking away? What did he leave behind for his wife, his wealth, his memories, or just an echoing emptiness? And what truly unfolded in those final years, behind that wooden door? To understand that silence, we must follow the echoes back to his beginning, to a Georgia boy who first stepped on stage, not to be famous, but to be true to himself. The beginning of an artist. Pernell Roberts was born on May 18, 1928, in the small town of Waycross, Georgia, a place of timber trains, tightly packed houses, and muggy summers that stuck to the collars of button-down shirts. He was the only child of Mr. Pernell Elvin Roberts Sr., a salesman for Dr. Pepper, and Mrs. Minnie Myrtle Morgan, whom the town affectionately called Betty. They were a typical Southern family, simple, hard-working, and quiet about their dreams. But young Pernell was different. He was enthralled by music, spending hours playing the tuba, drumming, or sketching dramatic masks while other kids ran and shouted in the yard. At church, he volunteered to recite scripture dramas on stage. At school, he joined every play, even when the part was a nameless foot soldier. The stage, be it a creaky wooden platform or a modest church hall, was where he found a different kind of life. Roberts enrolled at Georgia Tech but left before finishing. In 1946, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, where he served as part of the military band. Not everyone understood, but to him, even in the military, art had to exist. He played trumpet, drums, and clutched his saxophone each night when the camp grew quiet. After his service, he returned to college, this time at the University of Maryland. That's where he met Shakespeare. And Shakespeare never let him go. Antigone, Othello, Macbeth, each classical play opened up vast inner chambers within him, deeper, more resonant than before. But once again, he didn't finish his degree. Not because he failed, but because he was ready to live the real life, the one without grades or professors, only applause and the eyes of those waiting in the dark. The man of the stage, and the tragedy of the screen. Pernell began his journey with touring theater troupes. He performed during the summers, slept in trucks, and ate cold sandwiches between hastily assembled set changes. But to him, that was freedom, a sweat-drenched freedom, but one worth every drop. By 1955, his talent was undeniable. He won the Drama Desk Award for Best Actor Off-Broadway, thanks to 2 Shakespearean productions. 2 years later, he arrived in Hollywood. Then came 1959, Bonanza found him. Adam Cartwright, principled, educated, unshakably brave, was a role seemingly tailor-made for him. Millions of American families saw him on black-and-white screens every Sunday night. But inside Roberts burned a slow fire. He grew weary of television's repetition. He felt constrained. The character of Adam, an independent engineer, still had to ask his father's permission for every decision, as if he wasn't already a man in his 30s. "It's ridiculous," he once said with visible frustration, "for 3 grown men to constantly seek their father's approval just to act. the dissatisfaction only deepened. He clashed with writers. He disagreed with directors. He was prohibited from taking other roles due to his contract with NBC. And then, he erupted. Roberts openly criticized Bonanza, calling it junk television. At one point, he compared acting in the show to the great violinist Isaac Stern being forced to perform with the Lawrence Welk Band, a cutting metaphor for wasted talent. By the 1964 to 1965 season, at an age when most Hollywood actors only dream of stability, Pernell Roberts made one of the boldest decisions of his life, a decision that would come to define him. He left Bonanza. No scandal. No tearful farewell on television. Just a simple, yet seismic, choice: he did not renew his contract. Bonanza was one of the most successful television shows of all time, and Adam Cartwright was an inseparable part of its identity for millions of viewers. But for Roberts, the spotlight had become too harsh. He no longer wished to play a role he felt had lost all meaning. When his 6-year contract ended, he quietly closed the door, and never looked back. In the show, Adam Cartwright's departure was handled with such subtlety it bordered on vague. He was said to have moved overseas, perhaps to Europe, or back east to manage family affairs. There was no farewell scene, no goodbyes. Just a few scattered lines in later episodes, as if no one quite knew how to deal with his absence. His final episode, Dead and Gone, aired on April 4, 1965. Although 2 pre-recorded episodes, A Good Night's Rest and To Own the World, aired afterward, Adam's presence had already begun to fade. It wasn't until 1993, in a special installment, that the character's fate was revealed. He had moved to Australia and built a successful career in construction, on par with his father, Ben Cartwright. But as for the real Roberts, where did he go? Return to the stage, first love reclaimed. Immediately after leaving Bonanza, Roberts didn't choose rest. He didn't open a restaurant or buy a coastal inn like many stars of his era. Instead, he returned to where it all began, the stage. He toured with Ingrid Bergman in George Bernard Shaw's Captain Brassbound's Conversion, a play of depth, drama, and rich philosophy. Then came Camelot, The King and I, The Music Man, productions that carried him across America, not under the glow of television cameras, but through live applause, where the actor truly touches the audience's heart. Lorne Greene, his close co-star on Bonanza, once tried to persuade him to stay. Greene said, "Stick with it for a few more seasons, then use the money to open your own theater, hire good writers, and stage whatever you want." But Roberts shook his head. He didn't want to compromise. He didn't want to trade even one more day for something he no longer believed in. Michael Landon was more direct. He accused Roberts of not trying to improve the show, calling him stubborn. And with a touch of indifference, Landon added, "When he left, we split the profits 3 ways instead of 4. Everyone made more money." And looking back, he had no regrets. 20 years later, in an interview with the Chicago Tribune, a reporter asked, "Do you regret leaving Ponderosa after 6 seasons?" Pernell chuckled. "Good heavens, no," he replied. "If anything, I only regret not leaving sooner." For him, peace of mind mattered more than anything. "There isn't enough money in the world to keep me in a job I no longer enjoyed," he once said. When asked about the millions in revenue he missed out on from Bonanza, he simply shrugged, "How much money does a person need to live? I never needed or wanted very much." To Roberts, life was an internal journey, not a race for fame. He was never seduced by the word celebrity. He once smiled and told a journalist, "What's a star? Something that hangs in the sky? That's the only definition I accept." In his mind, what mattered wasn't being remembered, it was living true to himself, without selling his soul for the price of fame. An artist who wanted more than just a role. According to Bill Kiley, a representative in the industry, Roberts always wanted Bonanza to be something more than just typical Western entertainment. He longed for a television show that could touch on broader social issues, human rights, inequality, morality. But his discussions with the producers often ended in silence. "I thought the show would be more nuanced," he once said. But in the end, it didn't go that way. And so, he left. Not because he hated Bonanza, but because Bonanza wasn't big enough to hold the weight of his artistic dreams. Pernell Roberts had once been the star of one of America's most beloved television shows. But even while Adam Cartwright's smile still graced the screen, within Roberts had begun a quieter, longer, and lonelier battle than any cowboy showdown ever staged at Ponderosa. He once confessed to the Miami Herald that the heaviest burden he carried wasn't the conflicts with the crew, it came from within. It wasn't their fault. It was me. Things became too overwhelming for me mentally. I even had to see a doctor for help. In the entertainment world, where everything is glossed over with glamour and denial, few would dare to admit they were so emotionally exhausted that they sought therapy. But Roberts was always different. In another interview with the Daily News leader, he was more explicit about his decision. "I left Bonanza because I wanted to grow as an actor. Money is great, but I had to choose between financial stability and proving myself. I chose the latter, and most people thought I was crazy." Even after he left, the shadow of Adam Cartwright followed him. The roles that came his way were all the same: cowboys, tall men in leather vests and wide-brimmed hats, principled, brooding, and silent. "I kept working," he said, "but I wasn't happy." Still, he never gave up. Not once. He was patient, chipping away, bit by bit, at the image the world had imposed on him. "It was a long road," he would later say. "They say the hardest step is the first. At first, I could barely lift my feet. But now, I'm enjoying even the holes in my shoes." Bonanza, no longer home. Roberts' departure from Bonanza wasn't just a casting change, it was a shock to both viewers and the production team. America had grown so used to seeing Adam Cartwright, the eldest son, intelligent, rational, and deeply moral, that no one could truly replace him. And in fact, they tried, and failed. Not long after he left the show, there were attempts to bring him back, as a recurring character who might marry and appear occasionally. But nothing materialized. Roberts was gone, and he wasn't coming back. Then, in 1972, another tragedy struck Bonanza. Dan Blocker, the actor who played Haas, the gentle giant brother, died suddenly of a pulmonary embolism at age 43. That was the final blow. In the script, Haas 2 was written as having passed away. And not long after, Bonanza, once the heart of millions of American households, came to a permanent close. A legal battle, for the right to own his image. In 1979, years after leaving the show, Roberts unexpectedly filed a lawsuit against ABC. The reason seemed minor, but it touched on something he had always fiercely protected: the right to control his own image. ABC had used an old clip of him in a promotional segment for Bonanza, without asking for permission. Though the network owned the rights to the show, Roberts believed his image, as a person, should not be reused indiscriminately. "They asked, and I said no, because they didn't plan to pay me. But they used it anyway," he recalled in an interview. "It was arrogant. That's why I sued." The outcome of the lawsuit was never made public. But the incident revealed one clear truth: Roberts never let others decide for him, not even a single frame. Losing his only son. Pernell Roberts may have won many battles in his career. But in his personal life, he endured a wound that no victory could heal. In 1951, he married Vera Mowry, a professor of theater history. That same year, they had a son, Jonathan Christopher Roberts. But the marriage didn't last. They separated in 1953 and divorced in 1959, just as Roberts' career was beginning to soar. Jonathan grew up apart from his father, attended Franconia College, and carried within him pieces of both artistry and freedom. But in 1989, at just 38 years old, Jonathan died in a motorcycle accident. There are no words that can fully describe such grief. Roberts rarely spoke about his son's death, but those close to him knew he was never quite the same again. Every glance of his held a darker tint. Every answer became longer, or quieter. After 3 failed marriages, Roberts finally married Eleanor Criswell, the woman who would remain by his side for the rest of his life. She alone bore witness to the extended silences within the Malibu cabin, a home once filled with scripts, instruments, and old photographs no longer hung on the walls. Pernell Roberts' final years, the home and the legacy. Some people go through life never knowing why they lived. But there are those like Pernell Roberts, who lived with every reason, and left this world having fulfilled every choice he made. His final years were no longer as dazzling as the days of Bonanza or Trapper John, but they were the quietest, the deepest, and the truest reflection of who he really was, a dedicated artist, a man of unwavering principles, and a soul that had endured far more than the screen ever revealed. After the 1970s, Roberts continued to appear in television series like Hawaii Five-0, Marcus Welby, MD, and MASH star. But it was his portrayal of Dr. John McIntyre in CBS's medical drama Trapper John, MD that marked his most successful return to the spotlight. No longer Adam Cartwright, no longer bound by the Western archetype, he was finally able to inhabit a character that was modern, grounded, and emotionally layered. The show ran for 7 seasons, from 1979 to 1986, serving as undeniable proof that Roberts could rise beyond the enormous shadow that had loomed over his name for more than a decade. But time does not stand still. And as the shadows of the late 1980s began to stretch across his life, his career, too, began to slow. The man who had once strode powerfully across the Bonanza set now bore the quiet weight of age and unnamed sorrow. New roles became fewer, fading in and out like fleeting appearances in lesser-known television dramas. But the most devastating blow didn't come from the industry. It came from his private world. In 1989, his only son, Jonathan Christopher, was lost in a motorcycle accident at the age of 38. It was a silent but soul-shattering loss. Not loud, not publicized, but everyone close to him could see it, the heaviness in Roberts' gaze, the brevity of his conversations, and the way his roles became little more than symbolic gestures. One of his final screen appearances was as a narrator in the documentary series FBI, The Untold Stories in 1991. After that, he all but vanished from Hollywood. No farewell, no announcement. He simply fell silent. And people understood, when an artist who once lived by his heart chooses silence, it means he is in pain. He withdrew to his Malibu home, a simple wooden cabin where no one could find him unless invited. Here, the man who had once been a defiant voice against injustice, racism, and creative laziness chose to live in peace, not because he had abandoned his ideals, but because he no longer wished to argue. But he never stopped watching. Deep inside, he still carried unsaid truths. He still held sharp opinions. He still questioned, but only within his own room. No cameras. No stage. By 2007, Roberts was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He didn't go to the press. He made no public announcement. No one knew, except those closest to him. And then, 2 years later, on January 24, 2010, he passed away at the age of 81. The funeral was private, attended only by family and longtime friends. No televised farewell. No background score selected for broadcast. He left this life the same way he had left Bonanza, without a goodbye, without looking back, and without leaving behind anything unnecessary. Though he was often labeled a rebel, for walking away from Bonanza at its peak or for speaking bluntly about injustice in the entertainment industry, Roberts never let those labels define him. For him, rebellion wasn't about seeking attention. It was about preserving the self. He never apologized for living honestly, and he never needed anyone's validation. He didn't live to be admired. He lived not to betray himself. At the time of his death, Roberts left behind an estate valued at around $10 million, most of it accumulated during 2 key periods, the Bonanza years, when his salary reached up to $10,000 per episode, an astronomical figure in the 1960s, and nearly a decade on Trapper John, MD. But for him, money had never been the goal. How much money does a person need to live, he once asked, and it was a question that never needed an answer. His home in Northridge, where he spent his final years, was not lavish, not a multi-million-dollar estate, just a warm and modest house in the San Fernando Valley, purchased in 2003 for about $631,000. Tucked in a quiet neighborhood, it may have had a front garden, a sunlit backyard, and a porch where he sat reading each afternoon. A space private enough to remain apart from Hollywood, yet open enough to welcome the evening light, much like the man himself, closing off the noise, but still full of quiet radiance. More than just an actor, Roberts was a tireless advocate. In 1965, he marched from Selma to Montgomery alongside African Americans, a historic milestone in the civil rights movement. While many of his peers stayed silent on political issues, he openly supported equality, protested the casting of white actors in minority roles, and pressured NBC to change. He didn't say what was easy to hear, but what needed to be said. Not to please, but to keep his conscience whole. And perhaps, Pernell Roberts' greatest legacy isn't in a role, isn't in a paycheck, and doesn't sit on any shelf of awards, but rests in his choice to live a life without compromise. He was not a star, in his own words, a star is something that hangs in the sky, not something you can hold in your hand. But it is precisely because he didn't choose to be a star that he became a true icon. Not because he was remembered, but because he lived, true to himself, to the very end. What do you think about the life of Pernell Roberts, and those seemingly reckless yet deeply wise choices he made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to continue discovering the stories of Hollywood figures who lived their eras with dignity, don't forget to like and subscribe.